Now, y'all know what it is, the real two-tat, all praise to God for everything. I mean, every single thing. And I'm here with my brother, Marathon Manning. We have a special guest tonight with us. His name is Luke St. Genies. And before we start the interview, we do a mental health check-in. How you feeling, Luke?
I'm feeling great. There's a lot of great things happening in DC. You all are in DC, so that's wonderful. And I'm doing wonderful, so I appreciate that.
How about yourself, Marathon?
Feeling good. I'm feeling blessed. I just had that dentist appointment I told you about that, but I'm real blessed.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So I can't complain, man. Just another day to put my feet above ground and just keep doing what I'm doing. God is great. So, Luke, take us back to the beginning. Where you from?
Absolutely. So I am from the UK, by ways of France and South Florida, and now obviously Washington, D.C. for the last 2.5 years, give or take. Born in the UK, born in Blackpool to a family who worked on military contracts. So I've always been involved in aviation and military aspect of things. Then moved to Paris, France when I was 2 years old. So very, very young. Don't remember the England part of things.
Yeah.
I lived in Paris for quite a while and just the suburbs of Paris as well there. And then after about 8 years in Paris, moved to Fort Lauderdale, Florida, where I did middle and high school there as well. And then moved to Washington, D.C. 2.5 years ago, give or take. And I'm loving every moment of it.
So how was life for you growing up? Did you grow up in a two-parent household?
I did. I'm very lucky too. But when we moved to the United States, my parents split up. Thankfully, it was an amicable split up. So I kept both, and both were still very amicable with themselves. So very thankful to have had a two-parent household, a very supportive household. Every single ambition I've had and continue to have, they're both incredibly supportive. Whatever means they can provide, whether that's financial, and most of the time that is emotional and decision making and things of that sort. So I'm incredibly thankful to have a very supportive family.
I love that. I love that. So talk about your positive influences you had growing up, like role models, like who played an instrument, piece in your life growing up?
Absolutely. So most definitely my grandmother. My entire female side of the family on both my dad and my mom's side are educators and teachers. And my wife is also a teacher. So teachers running my family very, very strongly. And my grandmother was a teacher in public school in France. She loved every single moment of it. And she was my life teacher from the very beginning. She would tutor me. She would help me out. I still am very bad at math, but that's not due to her lack of trying. That's just me not being good at math. But she would focus on that very much. And she was my strongest role model, I would say, definitely from birth until she passed quite a few years ago now. But she's still a strong role model to me, definitely in spirit. And my parents, my father is incredibly hardworking. He's the first in his family to go to college. He's worked incredibly hard for every single thing that he has and for everything he's provided to me. So he is an incredibly strong role model. And then throughout my life, throughout every single stage of my life so far, I've had someone who's pushed me over that additional, hurdle. I fly. My big passion is aviation outside of serving and helping my community. And I've had some wonderful flight instructors who have pushed me over those additional hurdles when I don't think I could do it myself. So people can be absolutely incredible and incredibly empowering, and just learning and listening to them can be wonderful and can just do miracles in your life. And so far, my biggest role models have been, again, my family, and as well as my flight instructor. And now my wife. She keeps me honest. She makes me, the person that I am today, and she's definitely my better half. So those are my little role models so far.
Blessings.
I like that. Oh, well, aviation. I want to know, how'd you get into that?
Yeah, absolutely.
With that one, I'm sorry.
So yeah, it's sort of a throw in the dark, but my dad's been skydiving my entire life. He does a lot of things, but one of the things he does is he skydives, and he's been doing that for a long time. And going with him, on weekends we would go. It's one of the few things we could do together. He would travel for work, so when he was home, we would go skydiving. That would be a good 8 hours, him and I. And then through that, you're interacting with pilots, with skydivers, with members of the military, everything left and right. And through that, I sort of found that passion. I found that the conversation was interesting to me. And I found that flying is very unique. Just having that ability to leave Earth, it's a huge relief in a lot of ways. And your stressors sort of stay on the ground. And a lot of people think that flying is stressful. I think it's the most relaxing thing I've ever done. It's incredibly relaxing. You just have to focus on one thing and just see how beautiful the Earth is from the sky, and how beautiful all neighborhoods are from the sky. You don't see boundaries. You don't see congressional districts. You don't see even, territorial marks. You don't see what this is a country, this is a state. You just see people living. And there's something incredibly freeing about that effect. So I got into it just by meeting people and by having conversations. I worked at a glider port. The first thing I flew was a glider. I've been flying since I was 13. It's crazy to think that I've been flying for that many years now, but I have been flying since I was 13. I first started flying gliders with some incredible role models there, all who served in the military and who still do. And then through that, I sort of just progressed to powered aircraft. And now I'm flying powered aircraft up here in the DMV.
He's only 19 years old.
I was just about to ask you, 19 years old and you know how to fly a plane. That's what you're telling me.
I do. Some people say not too well, but I'm doing well so far. So
I don't think too many 19-year-olds know how to fly planes. So
yeah, you're pretty good.
You passing on that.
Yeah, for sure.
That's crazy. That's good.
Sure. And so talk about the differences between Florida and the DMV. What's something that you don't like or something that you do like?
That's a wonderful question. So I love Florida and I love the DMV. I really don't want to put, two in a box of love and hate. There are two sides to every single story, right? And Florida can be a serious challenge in terms of right now. My mother still lives in Florida. She works incredibly hard just to make ends meet, and individuals are moving down from New York and with a lot of money, especially recently, and are pricing people out. And that's a story that DC knows very well and has known for quite a while. And that's something that's impacting Florida quite hard right now. So that's something that I would say is something I dislike about Florida now is you have out-of-staters who are moving in and then renting out his property, and it's increased 150%. She would pay $1,200 a month for a beautiful 2-bedroom, and that's now gone up to $2,800 in just over a year. So that is completely unmarketable. You can't do that, even though you're working very hard. So
reasonable.
Absolutely. So that's something that I don't like about Florida. It's not the Floridians, it's these New Yorkers and these individuals from up north who are moving down. I love the state of Florida. It's given me so much, and it's such a blessing to be a Floridian, and I'm proud to have grown up in those environments. Despite those challenges, Floridians are strong. So I love that aspect of Florida, and it's a naturally beautiful state. I boated, I fished, and I flew. There's some beautiful things to do in Florida. And DC is honestly my heart town. I found it and I loved it. There's so much to do, and the people here are absolutely incredible. I mean, you have people from all walks of life. You have the president who lives in DC, and then you have people who are working incredibly hard from DC themselves, who have wonderful stories to tell and who have this incredible mentality of passion, hard work, and an incredible culture. And that's unique to DC. I wouldn't even say that's the DMV as a whole. I would say that's DC. And different neighborhoods in DC are their own gems. And I'm loving exploring DC and finding the new parts of DC. It's just been a wonderful passion. One thing I struggle and don't like too much about DC is the politics. I've been involved in politics even though I'm just 19, for a while, since I was 14, and especially in Florida politics, and I understand it quite well. In Florida, it's easy to see what's right and what's wrong. Sometimes the solutions are hard to come through, but at least we can see what's right and what's wrong wherever you stand politically. In Washington, D.C., I'm coming to learn that it's quite challenging. Everyone here, almost everyone, is blue. So a lot of people go up to the ballot and they see that it's just this blue Democrat who they're voting for, and it's the person who's been here forever. In Washington, D.C., we hear a lot that there's problems with funding. And it doesn't take much to realize that we don't struggle with funding. DC has a lot of money. Despite it not being a state, we have an incredibly large budget, and we have the ability to provide so many resources, which DC government tries to do, but it doesn't do that very well. You have these members of Congress, a delegate, Eleanor Holmes Norton, who's been there for quite a while, who has done what she can, but I wanted to believe that people need to cycle, get fresh ideas, fresh new faces, fresh individuals from different backgrounds, from different stories. And DC politics just tends to be establishment politician after establishment politician who make a lot of money and who do very little constructive for the city. And that's something that's quite frustrating. I'm not from DC, and I just see that, and it's quite painful to see that we have all this money. Florida doesn't have that much money per person to spend. DC has a lot of money per DC resident, per Washingtonian to spend, and it's not put to the right use. So that's disheartening. But DC as a whole is absolutely incredible. Politics, I wouldn't say so, but DC as a whole is absolutely beautiful.
Mm-hmm. Hey, so from everything you just said, I have about 3 questions. So I'm gonna hit you with the first one. What influenced you to come to DC? Is that politics that influenced you to come to DC?
So I came to DC for school, for GW. But I wouldn't say that I came for GW. I chose GW for DC. I wanted to go to school in Washington. I visited DC. I came here and I said, this is where I want to go to school. And funnily enough, I only applied to schools in the District of Columbia. I applied to Georgetown, American. I applied to GW. I applied to every school that I think I would fit in quite well and had the academic potential for me in DC. And I was very thankful to be selected for GW. And then GW had a wonderful ROTC program, which I was involved in. So to answer your question in short, I didn't come to DC because of something. I chose something in DC because I wanted to come to DC, if that makes sense. So I wanted to come to DC, and then GW just happened to be here and be right for me.
For sure. Okay, now I like that. I like that answer. That's an amazing answer for one. The other thing I do want to ask you is also, can you elaborate a little bit on how you just said that we get a certain amount of funding per citizen in Washington, D.C.? Not too, knowledgeable on that. I'd like you to, let me know something about that.
Absolutely. So there's so much more I can learn on that. So much more. However, what's quite transparent is that DC has a big budget. So DC has just under 700,000 residents. That's a lot of people, but that's also quite small for a state. We're still bigger than Wyoming and Vermont, which are 2 states, but DC has this, 9-person legislature. And each, individual makes a lot of money. Each, member of the council, I don't remember how much they make, but they make upwards of $150,000. That's more than any legislature in the United States. And that's just a little bit less than a member of Congress or House or Senate. So members of the DC council ultimately act as these representatives and senators for their district. And under the Home Rule Act, that is all amendable. DC gets to sort of pick, give or take, what it can do and what laws it can implement within, some oversight. But the key word is oversight. DC can do something, and then Congress can say no. It doesn't need Congress to do something. So there are some limitations to that. There are some laws that you have to follow. But the way I like to look at it is, you can walk down the street, and there are no doors that you have to open to walk down a public street. But if you're doing something illegal in that public street, then the police can come to you and say, hey, I need to talk to you. You can't do this, or whatever they want to do. DC is, a lot of politicians act like there's these doors that we have to open to get to a final destination, when in fact, we just have to walk straight. So the broad, perspective of that is that politics are being played, and they're being played very well. But DC not being a state is very important, and DC should be a state. However, it's not the reason why nothing can get done, and it's being used as an excuse. So there's that, but also the funding per resident. DC has a big budget. We have state taxes. DC levies state taxes. I pay them in my income. I see how much comes out. It's a lot of money. I'm sure you all do as well. It's a lot of your income. In Florida, we don't have that, for example. And a lot of other states have smaller income taxes. So DC has a very large state income tax and taxes on things. So tourists who come through DC, we have a lot of tourists. We have a lot of businesses. So DC makes a lot of money, frankly. That doesn't go to the federal government directly. That goes to DC's government budgets. And we have a lot of projects and a lot of programs that the DC government implements. The problem is they throw money at a problem, and they don't want to see that problem through. So the great example, I see Mayor Bowser as the perfect example of that. She will say, I put this much money towards something, and then she'll say, it's not my fault, nothing got done. That's not that's not DC problem alone. That's a problem across the United States and across politics. But to resolve problems, and the best example that I can find right now for that is healthcare and gun violence. It doesn't just take money and laws. It takes perseverance and unified approach to find a solution. That doesn't happen. So DC has a lot of money to spend per resident. I believe the last estimate I did, and please don't quote me on that, but was just under $40,000 per resident. That is huge per year. That is a lot of money to spend. Florida has, I think, 12,000 at most. That means public schools, healthcare, hospitals, parks, streets, everything that the government provides. DC has more per person. And DC is also a lot smaller. We don't have all these things that other states have. So we have the ability to implement things that the rest of our nation can't implement, frankly, based on what they have. Nothing is stopping DC from implementing a healthcare system. Nothing is stopping DC from implementing their own policies that can make them stand out. What is the game of politics. And DC has, what I was talking to some other people about is I call it a bloated government. It's very, very big, very, very large, but nothing from inside is coming out. So we have huge budgets, and it's not, the budgets are all public, and to see where all that money goes, it's absolutely insane. DC members of the DC government make so much money and do very little work. That's just an example of that.
Sure. Sure.
You
For sure.
definitely you schooling us on something.
Yeah, for
I'm
sure.
not gonna lie to you, because I'm not a big fan of politics just for that reason, what you're saying right now, and it's very interesting hearing it from someone that is very involved in it.
So let me ask you a question. What got you involved with politics? Because you said you started at 14, fairly young. And so was it your family? Like, it was around you? Talk about that.
Absolutely. I would say that family and friends were an influence. I wouldn't say they were my pivoting factor.
Right.
I've always been involved in public service. I wouldn't say politics, but I've always been involved in public service. Even in France, the example I like to use, but I was elected to this, city council for young people, and we drafted in bills that were implemented for us. There were small things like changing the lunch and things like that, but on a city level. That was my first sort of introduction to what public service looks like, and that the biggest problems that face people are not wars and these things that we can't touch and feel. They're our roads. They're how we feel, and health-wise, they're what we eat, they're what we drink, they're what we drive on, they're what we walk on. Those are the biggest problems that impact every single individual day to day. And that's what I saw as the root of public service, is what does that look like? That was my first introduction to that, was just that as like a 10-year-old in school, just having those conversations with elected officials. And then in the United States, the biggest pivoting factor for me was definitely after the shooting at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School. We had some meetings with some elected officials, and some were very nice and were willing to make an impact and to make a difference. And I still see them trying to do that. And the majority were not, or they were playing this game of politics and this game of thoughts and prayers. And what was very unique about Marjory Stoneman Douglas is that it wasn't just me who had that thought. It was a huge group of students across the United States who had that thought. And that was the first huge movement that the United States has seen. It was the largest march in American history. In modern American history was the March for Our Lives in Washington, D.C. And that was organized by peers of mine. And that was my biggest driver into what public service would look like, is that if we can't live our life freely without the threat of gun violence, then what is the point of a government in the first place? And that's what drove me into that initially. And then I started working on a gubernatorial campaign as the paid intern, and it sort of evolved from there. So that was my introduction to it. But to answer your question, the pivoting factor was that public service has always been, exposed to me as very early, and what that should look like, not what it does look like. I think what a lot of parents talk about is that, government sucks, and this is that, and, it's always your enemy. I was always taught that it had problems, but that someone had to fix it. And I would say that that's credit to my parents and to the individuals who raised me.
Cool. So let's talk about this. As you look at the news, you see what's been going on, a lot of mass shootings at schools, grocery stores, stuff like that. What is your take about that? Because it seems like you're not safe anywhere. Like, kids are supposed to be safe at school. Now they can't even go to school. What is your take and your thoughts about that?
Absolutely. It shouldn't be. It shouldn't be, for lack of better terms. It shouldn't be that case, period. And that's a uniquely American problem. Now, I'll be frank, I don't like either party. I struggle to call myself anything. I really do, because I don't see parties as being a mechanism of good ideas. I see them as a mechanism of good ideas for a huge group of people. And a huge group of people cannot implement the ideas or represent the ideas of hundreds of millions of Americans. So I struggle to affiliate with a party. So both parties have their take on it. I don't believe that either party wants to see kids dying in schools. But there's clearly one party that is more committed to finding a permanent solution than another. So on that note, it is a uniquely American problem. Violence is not a uniquely American problem. Gun violence is a problem that is unique to our nation. So the clear problem with gun violence is guns. Other countries, as I mentioned, I do come from France. We have challenges with firearms, but they are incredibly minute, and they are found and taught and punished and implemented very effectively. We have challenges with knife violence, but a knife cannot do that sort of damage, and it's very easy to keep a knife wielder out of a room because you can't break a door with a knife. So our problem is with guns. And the first step to finding a solution is having concrete conversations, not with politicians, but with members of the public. And a great dialogue is a way to do it. And a uniquely American problem calls for a uniquely American solution. And the United States is not established and is not built by political parties, it's built by people. And the solution is rooted in people. And over 80% of Americans on a very recent poll still believe that stricter gun regulation should be implemented. And that is, I think, the be all and end all of this conversation with the stakes of gun violence, is that America wants gun violence to end. What is stopping us from doing something very effectively and very swiftly is the nuances to a conversation, not the conversation itself. And the people who are implementing these little bits in these conversations that are, I will never, an example is, I will never, support a bill that removes a assault rifle from a legal American. Those are things that they're saying the exact same words as the Democrats using different verbiage. The Democrats are saying, an illegal person shouldn't buy a gun. The Republicans are saying an illegal person shouldn't buy a gun. They're just using different words to say the exact same thing. So we're not having conversations. We're not having, these national hard and, challenging talks. We're just waiting for something to happen. And I think that the American people are realizing that. And I think that the American people are coming to an understanding that our elected officials are not to be trusted with this issue alone. And what it's going to take, and our solutions are not complicated. They're just complicated to implement in our current political system. And we understand that, the first steps that we have to take is to have this national unified solution, which takes politicians with guts who are willing to see this out, not in 6 months, but to see this out from implementation now to 10 years from now. This problem cannot be resolved in 20 minutes, and it cannot be resolved by sending millions of dollars towards either law enforcement or to nonprofits. It is a comprehensive solution, including mental health, including stricter regulations and background checks, including stricter, licensing requirements, stricter enforcement of what that looks like. Those are all part of the solution. And, Republicans are saying the solution is mental health. The Democrats are saying the solution is guns, and some are saying mental health as well. They're all the solution. It's just putting those into play and electing and ensuring that our elected officials are working towards implementing the solution, not just passing laws. And it's going to take bold, targeted national legislation. And just some states doing it is not enough, because it's very easy to drive across a state line. So.
Sure. So, there are questions?
Well, yeah, I do. But you're elaborating so much. It's almost like you're answering the questions as you go. Yeah. But I did want to point, underline or highlight, what do you think that is stopping these very important conversations from happening? What is getting in the way of that? Because I'm definitely concerned about it. I have a 9-year-old. He's in elementary school. The day that the last shooting happened at the elementary school, I was dropping my son off, and I remember one of the things I was telling myself, man, I'm grateful that I'm able to do this, to take my son to school. But just highlight that. What is stopping it, and what should we be doing in order to get there, to where we're having these conversations and actually making progress?
Absolutely. That's a very hard conversation. And I think a very hard answer as well. I think the biggest thing is that we're living in America is incredibly divided. And both sides of this divided line are blaming the other divided line, just making it harder. So I'm not gonna stand here and say Trump has divided our country. I'm not gonna stand here and say Biden or Obama has divided our country. I don't think that's true. I think our nation for quite a while has been on two diverging paths, and some things have just served as catalysts to reinforce those divergences. So we live in a place where we have two sets of facts. You watch Fox News at the same time as CNN, and sometimes they're reporting on the exact same thing. And Fox has their own set of facts, and CNN has their own set of facts. And are both potentially correct? Yes. The challenge is that we are, everyone, no matter what, we're fed information that we want to hear. And there's so many issues with that, but data, everything we do and we see and everywhere we go our GPS coordinations and locations. Those are all adding to what is fed to us, what data we have, and what information is given to us. So we're living in two separate Americas, but we're still the same people is the challenge. So there's two of the same people living across a ravine, and there's no bridge connecting them. That is the problem. So the first steps, I think, is to not look at someone as a Republican or as a Democrat, or as a Southerner or as a Northerner, or as an immigrant or as an American, but just saying, you pay your taxes, you drive on our roads, you go to our schools. Based on your experience, do you want from your government? That is a conversation to have, not who are you going to vote for next, but what do you want to see in your everyday life? I think that's the first step, is not reinforcing these party lines, because I think they're incredibly detrimental.
Cool. Look, we have like 8 minutes left, right? Because I got give us 40 minutes on Zoom. We give me 40 minutes. So I want to ask you like a pivotal question. What would you do to change gun laws to ensure the safety of civilians, such as Manny and I, regular people? Like, what would you do to change it?
Children.
Absolutely. So there's a challenge to that. I think it depends on where I am, right? If I was given the opportunity to change it on a national level and say somehow I can implement a law that'll stick, I would implement what I just stated. So I would implement ensuring that every single person is required to get a license. To drive a car, you need a license anywhere in the United States.
Right.
And it's not that hard to get that driver's license, but a lot of people are unable to get that driver's license. And we wouldn't know that they can't get that driver's license unless they try and they do the test. So to get a firearm, if you're a legal firearm owner and you're going to be safe and responsible, wonderful, because you're going to pass those tests. But those who are not will not pass those tests. So ensuring that we have a national requirement to own a firearm, that there is a registration of what that firearm is, who has that, and why do they have that firearm. They can use a reason to just self-defense. That's perfectly fine. But a lot of people are very open about their interests to hurt people. So that's the first very good step. In other countries, you're required to have a doctor's note. I'm required to have a doctor's note to fly a plane. I think it's there's a lot of things to go there, but I'm allowed to fly planes in a free country. However, a lot of people are not, because they're not medically qualified to fly a plane. Same thing for firearms. I think a lot of people should be required to have a doctor's note to own a firearm. And then, the biggest sort of national level is ensuring we're implementing national policies that are logical, that still, recognize that the Second Amendment is a right. However, that right is infringing on other constitutional rights. I still think that, your freedom to live, to prosper, and to grow is far more important than your freedom to own a firearm. So just implementing national policy that's logical. And I think the first good step to that is licensing and training.
Cool. So look, I want to ask you this 2 quick questions so before we get up out of here, right? What is your take on police brutality?
Absolutely. It's a problem. It's a problem. And I personally do not dislike police. I dislike American police culture. Other countries have that problem too, but our police, from the initial stage, we have a lot of absolutely wonderful police officers who do it for the absolutely right reasons. However, they also struggle with that police culture, and that from the very beginning, the police in the United States recruits people who want to have guns, who want to drive fast, good-looking cars, and who want to pass a traffic light. Those are the people that the police culture in the United States tends to attract. And again, the word is culture. In other countries, being a police officer is not as attractive unless you want to serve your country and you serve your citizens. In the UK, police officers are this yellow, bright, very reflective person who walks around and everyone can see them and knows them. Here in the United States, our police officers are all incredibly tactical, black, subverged. They have all these cool insignias and logos. It's very militarized. So I think part of that challenge is that who is the police attracting from the very beginning? Is it attracting good people? It absolutely is. I've met some absolutely incredible law enforcement officers, but it also is attracting some incredibly bad people. And we also lack the same thing, a national requirement for law enforcement. Some cities have wonderful law enforcement who have very few challenges. And a lot of other places really struggle with law enforcement and have some terrible cases. And that's a very problematic and salient problem. So national requirements for what law enforcement training should look like is very important. And again, if you compare, other countries are wonderful things to look at, because we don't have to do exactly as they do, but we can see what they do and how that works in large and similar countries. Other countries don't have similar problems when it comes to, death from law enforcement. A lot of countries have problems with police brutality, but that doesn't lead to death as much as the United States. So just looking at what other countries do and how we can improve that. And again, how can we be and bring a uniquely American solution? We look at things as a problem and that we don't see a solution. A lot of people say, well, it doesn't happen in Finland because Finland is, everyone's the same in Finland and everyone has the same education. That might be true. So let's come up with a uniquely American problem. Finland came up with a uniquely Finnish solution. Let's come up with a uniquely American solution. I think the first step to that is, who are we hiring into our police force? We have to make sure it's targeted hiring, that people are joining the police force to join and serve their community, not to carry a firearm or drive a fast car.
The last question, what can we do? What can we do?
Keep doing and having these conversations. I think that's the most important thing. It's hard work, but it takes time, and it's the work that matters. CNN won't change the mind of anyone.
Right.
They will watch it because they want to watch it. But these conversations in communities are incredibly important. Just hearing what people want and what they, want to see people change and people do, and why they believe what they believe. I think that most people believe what they believe for a reason.
For
And
sure.
that as soon as we try to discredit that person, we are just further harming our cultural problems. And I think that everyone's experiences are valid, and that everyone is allowed to their own opinion and to their own, understanding, and that they shouldn't be pushed into a corner or pushed to believe something that they might not believe if they have these conversations. So just understanding that there are good things that can happen if we work to make them happen. And that means that, we're working from the very beginning within the community to raise leaders who want to serve the public and not serve solely themselves. And I think it's important to note that there's nothing wrong with, gaining wealth through service. I don't think there's anything wrong in gaining, notoriety through service. I think there's something wrong if you're doing those before your public service. I think if you're serving your community well and they know exactly what you're doing and why you're doing it, and they still like you and they still want to elect you because of what you're doing, not because of what you tell them, but because of what you're actually implementing, then we're doing the right things.
Mm-hmm.
I love it.
This
Love
is
it.
beautiful, beautiful. So now you want to take us out of here, man?
Hey, there you go. Thank you for having us. Thank you for coming on.
Yes,
I really
man.
appreciate you, man. I really enjoyed listening to you, and I would look forward to talking to you some more. And there you have it, man. The real.
The real, man. Thank you so much, my brother.
Thank you.
Luke
Thank you.
St. Genie. Thank you for coming out and taking your time. God bless you, brother.
Thank you both. Thank you so much.
Yes, sir. Take care.
Okay. Bye-bye.